Well, this time Sam is not here. Welcome everybody to Casual Watch Talk, the Sunday social. We have a panel. We're going to discuss some highbrow topics when it comes to what's going on in the watch industry, which leaves me right out of it. I'm here mostly to hear the other guys talk. But as we get going here, Mark, you are in the hot seat. What is the wrist check today?
The wrist check today is the Erebus Origin, otherwise perhaps known as the Jody watch, and I have it in the teal dial, and it's a cracking little watch with Seiko movement and a brilliant loom and a really, really good bracelet with micro adjust and quick release. So for the money that you pay, and this was $335 delivered to my door, it's an excellent first effort from Jody and the team. So really good watch.
Well, and you hit on all the specs that if Jody didn't hit those specs, he would be hearing about it from the whole world, because those are all the things that fall in the moans and niggles in Jody's section there. So yeah, that's a great looking watch. Dave, what do you have today?
What's Dave got today? Dave has his Arnold and Son Perpetual Moon.
Beautiful.
Very nice.
What he's wearing today, which is, the time's set. Don't expect the moon to be set, because that's just not ever going to happen, because that's just too much hassle. But yeah, pretty nice. Manual wind, circa, I think it's about 80 hours of power reserve, something like that. So pretty punchy, it has to be said. And you've got this little dial here where you can see the moon in different states, and a little indicator, which allows you to precisely set the moon phase on it, which is pretty cool, because usually setting moon phase is something of a push the button till it looks something like what you think it should look like and give up there. But this one does actually let you set it. You can see the little kind of markers going around the edge of it as well. So you can kind of literally count the age of the moon from a full moon to a no moon type thing. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
Very cool.
Nice case on it, because it kind of, you can see it kind of chamfers into the back case back. So actually, although it's, I think, 41, 42 mil, something like that, it actually wears a little bit smaller on the wrist, and the lugs do drop away quite nicely. So it doesn't wear as big as you would expect it. It's not an Omega trick, where an Omega 42 is a big watch. But yeah, pretty cool. Wears well, except for does it still do it? It does it when you start wearing it, but it's got a wee squeaky strap on it, which is somewhat annoying. But and the guilloche dial on there, which kind of goes from blue to purple. So yeah, it's a cool piece actually. You don't see too many Arnold and Sons in the wild, so every time I see them, I think, yeah, that's a brand that should get a bit more attention. It has to be said. So that's what I'm wearing.
Great looking watch, beautiful.
That's fantastic. Is that precious metal or is that stainless?
This is platinum.
Oh,
okay.
Nice.
That's a precious metal, all right.
That's a precious metal.
They do it in stainless, platinum. I think they do white gold. They definitely do a yellow gold, and they do a variety of different dials and stuff like that going on with it as well. So yeah, it's they are. How would I describe them? They're relatively well priced compared to maybe their peers. That's not to say that they are reasonably priced from a point of view of anything reasonably priced in the watch world, but compared to what you'd be paying for, I don't know, other brands, I guess, that play in the same ballpark as it, they're pretty well done and pretty well finished for the money.
Nice, very nice,
fantastic.
Seiko Todd, what do we have today?
All right, I'm going to go back to I'll have the oldest watch probably is and I was practicing this earlier. Here we go. Nope, I still got some glare. There we go.
There you go.
So this is, there it is. This is a 1970 6138-0010, I believe. This is commonly called the UFO. There we go. And this is a JDM model from late 1970s. So it has the speed timer, which you can barely see at the 9 o'clock. And it has been restored, and it's on its original bracelet.
Nice.
Right there. Yeah. Actually, if I back off a little bit, that's probably even better. Here we go. Follow my hands.
There you go.
Great looking watch.
I
Yeah.
love these watches. It's so cool. Seiko was doing so many cool things, late 60s, early 70s, that, like a lot of their offerings are just fantastic, including disrupting the Swiss watch industry, of course, in 1969. But good stuff.
Nice.
Bankrupting, I think, is the phrase you're looking for.
Yeah, that is exactly what happened. Today, I am just going with the boring, and it's the instant classic Tudor Black Bay 36 in the blue. It seems to be the one that everybody loved. It's one of my favorite
Banger if I
watches.
watched that. Totally underrated, that watch.
Nice watch.
Oh,
Is that
I-
a field watch technically? I was
That's a
just
great question.
watching a
It's-
YouTube video on that.
I don't know how to describe it.
Really
It's
is.
really just that Gata watch. You know what I mean? It's like it
Mhm.
do go anywhere, do anything.
I think I'd put it into field watch because, let's be honest, the Ranger isn't that, aside from being too big, it's not that different, really, the Ranger to that watch.
Mhm.
Okay, the
Yeah.
handset's a wee bit different.
Handsets.
I'd say that's Virgin. It's definitely more, because it's a Black Bay technically, isn't it?
Yeah.
I would
Mhm.
say it's definitely more fieldy than it is divey for sure, because it's fixed bezel, isn't it?
Fixed bezel, but it has the 150 meters of water resistance, which is really
great.
cool because the new ones don't. The new ones are 100, and so it was like
Yeah.
I was really happy to grab this before the change. Actually, I like the
Yeah.
third party movement in it as opposed to the in-house movement, and I mean it's bang on. The maybe 2 seconds a day,
Mhm.
and it's a third party movement
Yeah,
because
nice.
Tudor does do their own in-house regulation before they head out, and it is it's one of those watches I kind of tend to wear it all the time and just keep it wound, and then I'll rotate other things in for a few hours in the day and then go back to this in the evening. It's like the everyday.
Yeah, it's a cool watch.
Mhm.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a complicated topic today. I don't even really know I'm just going to read what Sam said, and then Dave said talk about this because we're going to being a shareholder value versus independent controlled brand. So that was like a mouthful, and I said, I don't even know what we're going to do here, but Dave said he's got this. So Dave, take it away.
Okay, so I guess the premise of what the question is posing is, are the bigger shareholder or publicly floated watch brands, so, the ones that, are controlled by a group of people, is there a material difference in what they do as a business compared to the smaller independent brands who are generally owned by either individuals or by families? And is there a material difference in terms of the product offering, I guess, that they put to market? And I would argue that by and large, the answer is absolutely, because the big guys are businesses that have a want to drive profit. And a bit like the Apples of this world, could Apple bring out the next iPhone that completely blows the previous one out of the water? Of course they could. Do they? No, they don't, because they bleed that out slowly but surely to maximize revenue out of whatever they have currently got, which is, from a business perspective, perfectly sensible, but it's also boring. It stifles innovation, because whether they decide not to innovate because they don't want to, or whether they do innovate but hang on to it, or if they watch others innovate and try and close it down, like arguably, again, the kind of likes of Apple do, where they see a cool little company doing something that might disrupt their flow. So what do they do generally? Either try and close them down or buy them and then put them into a little cupboard somewhere and roll them out X years down the line when it suits them. And I think the big brands typically do that. Not knocking that they don't make good product. I think by and large, most of them do. Let's be honest, you can't make a watch that sells for multiple thousands and not be reasonable because folk just wouldn't buy them. It's as simple as that. But let's look at Rolex. They're hardly innovative in terms of what they've done in the last 20 years. Is it a nice watch? Sure. And I'm not talking about brand equity, brand value retention of the watch itself, or any of that. I'm talking just about product. The product itself is very staid, very safe, very iterative at the best. It's not even iterative, I would argue, nowadays. Omega, I tend to find with brands like Omega, what tends to happen is when things are good, they don't do a whole lot. When things get tight, they suddenly pull a couple of blinders out of the cupboard of, let's roll that out and see if we can get a bit of noise, a bit of news, a bit of sales going or whatever. The opposite, I think, is true of the little guys. They have to innovate. They have to push forward. They have to do things that are different to what everyone else does, or else what are they? They are just another brand copying what everyone else does without maybe the brand equity or value. So they have to do something, and you look at extremes, your MB&F, really pushing the boundaries technically, materials wise, all of these things. And you look at, there's a plethora of other companies, either opposite end of the price spectrum, someone like Studio Underdog, just doing crazy dials, the kind of thing that most brands would be like, let's just not ever think about doing that ever, And I saw Kent's put a thing up there, hard to improve in perfection. Well, I'd argue actually it's really easy to improve on perfection if your argument is what they currently make is perfect. And I think it isn't. I think it is as perfect as they tell you it is to be. Could they do things technically, materials wise, that make the watch they currently make much better? Absolutely. So anyway, that's my opening gambit.
It's a tough one from a business perspective, because I saw this conversation and I liked the correlation. So the Porsche 911 has basically been the 911 for as long as it's been a car in production. It's the same essential shape. It's the same essential vehicle. Now they've got
in grammar of design, right?
Yeah, in design, and I think the same is true with Rolex. You take a 90s Rolex, it's not as good as a modern Rolex as far as the movement and everything. It's so there's been those little iterative improvements, and I think it's tough for a company to go like, oh man, this is a seller, people love this, and if I make a radical change, I might not sell another one again.
Well, they did try to do away with the 911, the 928, 944, 924.
You mean the front engine liquid cooled cars, which were kind of a bread and butter for them, at one point.
But the 911 proved unkillable. What people don't realize, of course, is that the 911 and everything else is a tiny proportion of Porsche's business now compared to the Cayenne and the Macan. Mm-hmm. It's those two SUVs that are keeping every other Porsche sports car alive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What I would say as well, though, is I'm not suggesting that Rolex suddenly go out and change their brand identity or their design. Design is, whilst you can be innovative to an extent with design is too ingrained as a DNA of many brands, so they aren't going to change that. And I'm not even arguing they should. But if we look at their movements are solid, they're super reliable, but they haven't really done very much innovative in terms of movement architecture, movement design. Power reserves can be considerably better across most brands if they really wanted them to be. But they don't, because if they can still milk the teat that gives them the moneymaker, they will continue to do it. Because ultimately, why would you invest money when you can milk the money that you've already got? And that's what a lot of them do. Whereas a lot of the small brands are the ones who have to be innovative to be relevant, but they're the ones ultimately who do drive what the bigger guys do up the road. And I think the Swiss watch industry is extremely conservative and extremely slow to move, partially because of the construct of the industry, and also because they know that it makes them money and it doesn't cost them money. Look at the Japanese, look at Grand Seiko, look at these kind of brands. They're much more innovative, much more forward-thinking, much more adaptable than anything that comes out of Switzerland in the main. Spring drive, all of these types of things. And they continually push it forward as well. There's big leaps and bounds. They've pushed to twin barrels, more and more across the range. They're bringing in big leaps in movement technology that you just don't see broadly come. Not all, but you don't broadly see it coming out of the big guys in Switzerland.
And in terms of corporate culture, that would be a surprise, because Japanese corporate culture is quite often as conservative, if not more so, than Swiss corporate culture.
But again, I think it's probably because the Japanese, especially, Grand Seiko, Citizen and Seiko are the two big players for sure out
Mhm.
of the Japanese market, but they know it relative to the might of the whole Swiss watch industry. They're still pretty small fry, and they have to be innovative and forward thinking, and they have to move the needle in order to do it. And again, a comment again that's popped up there is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And there's a degree of truth in that, but there's been many companies who play that game and all of a sudden find themselves completely and utterly washed up on the shore. And there's plenty of companies who have been massive in the last 50 years who no longer exist because they played that game of
Absolutely.
Motorola.
Kodak.
Nokia is probably the most
Nokia.
relevant to many people in their day-to-day life. They ruled the mobile phone world, full stop, and they didn't see what Apple and Android were about to pull up their sleeve, and within months completely decimated them. Motorola completely get decimated in the computer chip game and the mobile phone game, and these were hundreds of millions, if not billion-dollar corporations, and they are either sold off or gone. And
then
so I'm not arguing, and this is not me saying that's going to happen to Rolex, but I'm not. But it also could.
And there are a few survivors. You have to figure out how to retool your business quite quickly. Microsoft would be an example of that. They had to do a retool. Apple were eating them alive in terms of operating system.
Right. IBM had to completely rethink their business model because when they were trying to protect it because they're building the world's quantities of VAXs and other these large machines, and of course they got disrupted by the PC industry, which they helped to invent. And then what did they do? Well, they became a data services company more than they're not really a hardware company much anymore compared to what they're doing now.
And if you look at a lot of the smaller, the smaller independent watch brands, you could probably argue that most of the push forward innovations in the last 20 plus years in watches have all come out of mostly the small guys. Even if you look at the big guys with things like Omega pushing the whole coaxial didn't come from Omega. Omega decided that they needed something to push them up. It came out of a little guy sitting in Isle of Man. That's where that came from. You look at silicon. The origins of silicon all hark back to Ulysse Nardin, not to any of the big groups. It's the smaller guys who've had to be creative and innovative that if they do something really good, it might end up in the bigger guys. But there's so many things that get pulled. You only need to troll through the patents for watches and see some of the quite cool things that have been done that are owned by some of the big guys that are absolutely getting sat on because let's just sit in that until we actually really, really need it.
Of course, if you sit on it too long, your patent becomes out of date.
Sure.
But that's 20 years.
Correct. I'm not saying but typically they don't just utilize it there and then.
The product life cycle though is another difficult thing now. When we're talking about computers and we're talking about primarily a software based innovation where you can pivot and you put some programmers in a basement and say, hey, we're doing this now. A mechanical watch is the ultimate version of hardware only. And so this guy at Omega says, I've got this new idea and we're going to make this new watch. How long does it take from that day till it actually gets to the boutique typically? And so my point is to that question.
I would say there's two ways you can pose that question. How long does it take and how long could it take? Which are two. Yeah.
Because there's that problem, especially, maybe not Rolex right now because they're in the hype beast, but your boutique is now sitting on some Omega inventory that they've had for several years. And now I have to get rid of that inventory. And I've got this new product that I want to put out in front of everybody, but I don't want to stop the sales of those. Those need to move as well. And that's I think where it gets scary for a monster to go, oh, we're going to make a monumental change for 2024.
Absolutely. And that also, there's many things feed into that. Overproduction is absolutely one of them. Too many brands make too many watches. It's as simple as that, because they have a factory to feed, they have people that are in the employ, they've got machinery that wants to run. But, especially the high end luxury watch for the bigger brands, your Rolex, your Swatch group, your Richemont group, your LVMH group. These guys are significantly overproducing watches for the actual demand in the place. You don't need to look that hard. You walk up any main town city high street and look in the jewelers, and you will find watches that have been in those windows for a very, very long time. And that's not a healthy place to be. So that in itself is those companies being forced to sometimes stifle innovation or stifle new because they know how much stuff is in the supply chain. But again, you can only blame them at the end of the day. They produced them. They over-egged the production. So, you've got that cycle. Whereas you look at, there are some brands who do, I think, play it pretty well in terms of they make small volume of something, knowing that they are undersupplying the market, but they constantly refresh and they constantly are dropping new into that range, and it keeps it fresh and it keeps it moving forward, and it allows them to move forward. I think that's more a day-to-day challenge of just, I'm not going to say badly run, but a business that could be significantly more, significantly better run from a point of view of product life cycles.
And then, going back to, go ahead, Dave. Go, Mark.
I was going to say there's also a fundamental difference between the objectives of a shareholder-owned company versus an independent one. A shareholder company has to deliver value to shareholders. So they're and this got far more significant from the early 80s with Neutron Jack Welch. He's the one 40 years ago who drove shareholder value, and we're that plus stock market deregulation changed the relationship between shareholders and managers of companies, so that rather than the stock market, it was never sleepy, but when you've got call out trading versus electronic trading and all the deregulation that happened in the early 80s, plus the shareholder value movement, brands and companies have to pay more attention to shareholders now. Whereas a trust owned or a family owned might decide we're going to spend more on innovation because as long as we're making money and that money is going up, we don't have to answer to the wolves of Wall Street.
Well, you see, it's interesting because most of those big groups, let's look at the three main ones: LV, Riche, and Swatch Group, and they are all traded companies, but maybe not in the true sense of a traded company, because more often than not they've got a patriarch or matriarch at the top that has a undue pressure or an undue influence within the business. In the case of, for example, Swatch Group, you've got Hayek at the top, who owns circa, I think, 23% of the shares of the group, but has something like 43% of the voting block rights. So you're like, there's a disconnect there for sure. But he had a massive falling out with some of his key financial stakeholders in January this year, where, Mark, you said quite rightly, if it's a publicly traded or a traded company with shareholders, the business's primary, in fact, in many countries, its primary legal obligation is to the shareholder. Hayek stood up in January and said, I don't care about share value, I just care about watches. And he said this at the board meeting. So you can imagine how well that went down with the people, which probably, they weren't happy about the fact that the share value has lost 40% of its value in the last 12 months. So, we're looking at these companies, and a lot of people look at these companies and think, oh, they're behemoths, they're worth a fortune, their shares are super valuable. Nearly all of them, without fail, are dropping like a stone and have been for quite a considerable time.
And the other thing to that is the other movement that had it made share price influential was to stop rent seeking by managers. You link manager compensation to share ownership and share price. So the managers who are seeing the share price go down, even if they only come into those shares 2 or 3 years after they've left, which a lot of corporations do, you'd think the managers might be looking at the share price too, because that's a good part. Corporation I work for, the shares are a significant part of their long-term compensation. So they care about share price 5 years out from when they leave. That's how they're supposed to manage the business.
Well, that's good. That's a healthy way to do it too.
Yeah.
But,
I mean,
well,
it was brought in to stop rent
investiture.
seeking. Yeah.
Yeah, we have got investiture from the workforce, or the key stakeholders in the workforce have an investiture in making sure the business has a healthy state of play within it. That's probably, or it's not atypical, certainly, in the watch industry.
But it's one of those things that in the US drives some very ruthless behavior.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah,
This comment
I could
from,
see it more.
well,
go ahead.
I was going to say this comment from Boresic Time, where Richemont's approach seems to be to add value by increasing by 40%. But this is something that seems to be happening almost across the board. Prices at Omega have been just like a couple times a year, bump.
Yeah,
and
everybody's outrageous right now. Yeah,
there's 2 or 3 reasons for that. Some that are valid, and others that are less valid. We'll go with. One is that exchange rates, the Swiss franc is problematic. It has remained overly strong for
it's a rocket ship.
Yeah, it's just, and even the Swiss government and the Swiss federal have kind of tried their hardest to stop it, but they're not succeeding at it, and it's running away with itself, and it means that for them, when they're having to buy currency or they're having to move product around the world globally, it has got markedly more expensive for them in the last couple of years than it has been. So there is a real world need for them to increase price in order to maintain margin. That's just part of it. That's valid in that any other business would do the same thing. That's just how that works. The other reason is, as volume drops, how do you maintain your turnover and margin? Well, an easy way to do it is ramp the price up. If you ramp the price up, sell less for the same amount of money, Bob's your uncle, oh, look at that, we've still managed to make more money. And actually, arguably, it can push your margin higher than it was previously if you're making more. And unlike a lot of industries, they seriously backdate the pricing to what we would call in most industries legacy inventory. Most businesses will only count inventory for the last maybe X months or maybe a year as current inventory. If it's older than that, it's deprecated stock and it gets sold at whatever price it was last at. I've seen Omegas that have been, I'm picking an Omega. I've seen watches from all brands that have been on shop floors for 2, 3, 4 years. And you can literally see the price tickets getting stuck on top of each other. And, in some cases, they have literally doubled, if not tripled in price from when that exact product landed in that retail store, and the retailer paid the same price for it. So that's the slightly more challenging side of it, for sure. New inventory, fine, I get it. Or if it's a new model and you've only had it a few months and the price goes up, fine. That's how the world works. But even discontinued models go up in price as well, which is just absolute lunacy. If it's discontinued and old and they haven't sold them, how do they think doubling it in price is going to make it move?
Yeah, it's interesting too, because to this point, we're talking a lot of business here. But so in the U.S., we sell a lot of pickup trucks. In fact, of new.
Never seen them in the U.S. Never seen a pickup truck in the U.S.
Out here in rural Virginia, I never see a pickup truck ever. Right?
It's all minis and smart cars. They're environmentally friendly everywhere you see. Yeah,
that's our Mini, right? Is a small Ford, is a Mini, but I mean, I forgot what the numbers are, but we sell hundreds of thousands. Ford does, Chevy does, Chrysler does, which is now part of Fiat, too. And then we also got Toyota. You got the imports run. Toyota sells big trucks here. Nissan sells big trucks here. And if I were a automotive manufacturer and I were to go, okay, I'm going to ask for 40% more this year, 20% more this year, for just the sake of raising the price, I would lose half my business in selling those trucks, and it would be taken up by Dodge. If I was Chevy, it'd be taken up by Dodge, by Ford, because in essence, those are somewhat like commodities, right? If I need a truck, I get to choose a lot. Maybe I'm a loyal Chevy guy, but if they're going to up it, well, I'll go buy a Ford or buy
Well,
used or something. Right? I mean, you can't do
to an
that.
extent, that's already happened. If the average price of a pickup truck is $90,000, a lot of people can't buy it.
Well, because you do have some cooperation, not a monopolistic way, but you do have some cooperation between the manufacturers because they do have similar supply chains. I mean, come on, right? The brake rotors all come from the same manufacturer. The transmissions from similar factories. Yeah, exactly, right. There are some costs that have to be moved up, and we've seen that throughout the economies of most Western countries now, especially. But if I just want to do something like boom, boom, I can't do it. Even if I have board approval, all these are publicly traded companies, unless you're Elon Musk. Now, if you're Elon Musk and Tesla, you do have a lot of control. That's a little bit closer to Hayek and Swatch in some ways. So you have a huge personality in charge of things, and you can kind of do stupid things like the Tesla truck, which is a fiasco.
Let's be honest, it's a fiefdom. Tesla's a fiefdom. It's
a
like
little bit
in
of
terms
of SpaceX is a fiefdom. I've known people that have worked for it.
Elon does what he wants, in the same way as he randomly sells you a car and then 2 days later drops it in price by 25 grand because he felt like it.
He felt like it. I mean, you can't do that in a normal publicly traded company, but you do have these exceptions, and so it's kind of interesting. I think some of the parallels between what doesn't work for things that are expensive but more commodities, and then other things where you have a fiefdom like Musk. Everything under Musk is a fiefdom. How does that then parallel the Swiss watch industry? And I do think there's some parallels there.
It's probably certainly if you compare in car industry, it's probably the only one that is comparable in any way, shape, or form to how the watch industry works. And they do operate. I guess at the end of the day, luxury watches in general are completely unneeded. So nobody in terms of regulators are likely to ever even bother to look and say, hey, wait a minute, how has this product doubled or tripled in price in the last 24 months? If the car industry did it, you could guarantee every key regulator in every Western country would be over them like a rash, wanting to know whether they were profiteering, what was going on, everything else, because as you said, it's a commodity. The beauty for the watch companies is there's just an instant assumption. You're obviously a rich idiot if you buy these watches, and if you buy more than one of them, you're absolutely a lunatic. Therefore, more the fool you if you're willing to pay the price. And you do get that kind of attitude, which is, why would we even bother to look into this? Because we're talking in this weird rarefied air of people who even consider spending more than $150 on a watch.
Yeah.
So they get so because of that, they quite literally get away with murder.
That's very interesting.
Right. And what's interesting too is, like you mentioned before, like with Grand Seiko, let's look at the structure of Seiko Corporation, which is still run by a relative of its founder, which is an amazing thing. But it's not a private company. But it's also hugely diversified. Seiko is, timing instruments. They're a materials company. They grow their own silicon, own quartz crystals. They build their own lubricants. They make their own lubricants. They don't buy it from anybody else. They make their own lubricants. They're the only truly monolithic watch company out there. But they're very diverse, and they make a lot of money in other things other than just watches. But when you have the head of Hattori, when you have that head of that company, that's a legacy from ones, and this is a very benign kingdom, I think, but and of course very efficient, very Japanese business oriented, and you can see some weird things though that come out of that, and some things are brilliant, but other things like we still complain about in terms of bezel alignments and stuff like that. Seiko doesn't care, frankly, I think, about bezel alignments and the way the watch community is constantly making fun. Oh, it's a fake if the bezel lines up right. Those
Right.
go to the Seiko community. It must be a fake. Look at the bezel alignment. It's great.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting though when you kind of see this where you're not purely a stakeholder company or a shareholder company rather, and how that works.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, let's be honest. The bezel alignment question is raised by probably a rounding error percentage of the total number of people who buy those watches. Most people go, oh, that's pretty. Oh, it's $350. Oh, great. Thank you. Goodbye. Done. End of story. And that's it. Whereas, I think it's a completely different topic, but I think too many of us, and I'll conclude me in it, have a very unrealistic expectation of what perfection in a watch actually looks like. There's this, I personally believe, a completely unreasonable expectation that, this little thing you put in your wrist that's got X hundred parts in it and it's priced at 2, 3, 4, 5,000 should be so perfect, so infallible to anything that could possibly go wrong with it, or anything whatsoever, that it's just completely unreasonable, because nothing is perfect. And the questions you see in forums and all these things, you just think, oh man, this is brutal, And if people knew what the true standards in the Swiss, especially in the Swiss watch industry, were, it's not even like electronics. Your mobile phone is generally made in a clean room environment. Your mechanical watch sure as hell isn't made in a clean room environment. It's made in a pokey little building in Switzerland, usually, that's probably been built 200 years ago. It's full of dust. If they're lucky, they've maybe got top extraction hoods, and the dust on the watch is literally, hold it at a meter or at arm's length, look at it for about 30 seconds, and if it looks okay, it is okay, and that's it. And that's where some of the big guys, to be fair, where one of the big advantages of these big groups is they are beginning to invest in much better manufacturing than the small guys can have. They're beginning to move into very heavily industrialized, very modern, and they are using, negative air pressure rooms and lots of other areas that they're beginning to use, and technologies they're beginning to use from other industries that are mitigating problems and allowing for a much better quality product for the money.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead, Todd. Go ahead, Todd V.
Well,
You've been dying to jump in for minutes.
No. This conversation it's like going in circles, and again, Boracic Time brings up a good point. Like Seiko, even at their cheap stuff, has not been immune to this kind of. It's like COVID pricing. It just never stops.
If it wants to go with prices, they could go with prices. It's absolutely. They don't have to. When they do that, they don't report to a shareholder. In my because they have so much going on, and they can do right. I mean, where's the innovation in some of this? How much NH35s do they still produce? I mean, come on.
Oh my gosh, that's insane. But
I think for me the biggest argument. Sorry, on you go, Todd.
Oh, I was just going to say the factor is, though, you have Grand Seiko, and I don't know the numbers because I was just looking at the Swiss watch industry numbers, on that Morgan Stanley report that came out. Right. I don't know where Grand Seiko falls in comparison to that, but I feel like they've got this giant buffer, this huge pillow of Seiko that lets them be able to pivot easily and quickly, like you said, Dave, to be innovative.
Right. For like Lockheed, right? We have Skunk Works, and they still have to do things right, but their job is not to make money. Right. Their job is to fix some technological issue. Boeing is Phantom Works. All this exists in the aerospace industry, as you guys well know. But Grand Seiko gets to sit and look at Mount Ituani, if I can say it properly. Right. They get to live. Right. They get to live in their world, and their objective. And this is a good point you bring up, Todd. Their objective is not to make something that's going to sell 10,000 more watches. Their objective is to, what can I do that's different, that hasn't been done? What kind of new process? I mean, look at that tourbillon. Oh my gosh, that's Grand Seiko tourbillon is an amazing feat. Never been done before, right? At least in any mass production. And then you even have Creedor, right? So you even have Creedor, which is really this handmade, like enamel dials and stuff like that on top of the whole thing. And
they got another one on top of that, Artist Studio.
Yeah, the Artist Studio. They can
2 watches a year
there. Yeah. And do all these, insane things. I think you can see some of that probably equivalent, like within Disney, like Lucas. Maybe some pieces of that live in some ways, although Disney, I think, is still much more of a shareholder beholden company. But you're right. Seiko is kind of like this pillow. And they're able to kind of do these crazy things, AMG for Mercedes, those sorts of groups. Porsche has their specialty groups too, obviously, too, that get to do crazy things. So yeah.
But even
Maybe.
Porsche expects their motorsport group to make money,
Yeah.
and it does.
Right. Penske does too. Penske was the same when Penske was running, and he's still around, but when Penske was running his racing teams, they still had to make money, even though it was all being, he had a huge $1 billion+ corporation running behind him and all the stuff he was doing. But those IndyCar teams, they had to make money. That's true.
Yeah, or at the very least, don't lose it.
Don't lose it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
cost neutral advertising is usually their friend when it comes to that.
Right.
But again, a lot of these
hobby.
brands like Seiko, a few folk have commented that Seiko are lifting their prices as well. Most of that is either they have to, and in Switzerland, a lot of the time there is certain inflationary pressures that have caused prices to go up. But also most brands like Seiko, also it's about brand alignment. They're not going to stay sitting where they are when everyone else is moving up the way, because it makes they feel they want to sit in the same ballpark as ABC. All the brands have got all their little flow charts of what brands they feel they align with in terms of spaces in retailers' windows and everything else. And if they also sit where they are, whilst these other brands are pushing up the way, those other brands are then effectively adding not necessarily margin percentage points, but pounds and cents or dollars and cents in the till of the retailers. Because if the price goes up by $2,000, but your margin percentage stays the same, you still make more actual physical bits of paper when you sell that. And a lot of retailers will think, well, why would I stick with the brand that's staying at the low end when I can sell stuff at the high end and make more money? So they all follow each other because they just ratchet each other up the ladder. They love following each other. It's a bit like snakes and ladders. And, so when one of them does it, the others will almost inevitably follow suit.
Right. And the elephant in the room is the Apple Watch. So how do I position myself, right? I don't want to compete with that. That Apple is the largest selling watch company in the world. Yeah.
And probably, as someone actually said earlier, if you want the best made watch in the world, buy an Apple Watch, because I guarantee you 9 times out of 10, if you discount all the, hand finishing and all the artisanal aspect of watchmaking, it probably is better than vast majority of watches on the market. Because
that or G-Shock, depends on what you want, but yeah,
well, absolutely,
And G-Shock's falling. Like Sam just did a review on that new G-Shock Rangeman, and I was telling him, like, for $500. I'm just going to get a used Apple Watch. I'm not going to get anywhere near that thing, because the Apple Watch is going to do everything it does and more. It's easier. So I want to come around now and sort of kind of hit the bigger question, which I think was being posed by this. What's better? You're a watch collector. Does this bother you that you're going to buy from a company that's not going to be innovative, or do you want the really innovative, cutting edge, bleeding edge watch that's doing something really wild and cool? As a collector, what's more important? And you guys who are commenting also chime in, because I think we say we want that, but what do I really want at the end of the day?
That's the $1 million question. The answer is there is no right answer, to be brutally honest with you. Rolex as a brand in general, and I'm not talking about the small kind of weird, wonderful world of watch collecting, but as a general, most people buy Rolex because of the brand name. They want to be seen wearing a Rolex because people go, oh, Rolex, you've made it, you've done well, you're whatever, that's why they buy it. And for most people, it's high street names in watches, whether it's Tag Heuer, whether it's IWC, whether it's Omega, whoever it is. And 9 times out of 10, it's because there is some relationship with acknowledgement of either their peers or the social grounding that they're in, that they feel they want it. In the same way as why do people buy ridiculously overpriced t-shirts with Balenciaga on them when you could buy a much better quality t-shirt, probably with no branding on it, from a slightly more obtuse fashion house? Because people want to be seen with that brand on them, and I guess it depends. I think I would definitely fall into more the camp of the independent, because any clothes I ever wear, I've got zero branding on them. I like nice clothes, but I don't wear branded clothes at all. Watches. Do I like stuff that Omega do? Sure, I like some of the stuff they do. Do I buy Omegas for their innovative kind of development and watchmaking? No. Do I buy other stuff for that? Sure. And I think as I've matured through kind of like watch collecting and everything, I think for me, I'm now much more interested in the more exoteric brands that do something a little bit funky, a little bit different, a little bit interesting, as opposed to the mainstream. But that's not to say mainstream don't do some cool stuff, because they do.
I think I use brand as an indication of, do I like the design language? So, and I also, with certainly the high-end independents, and feel free to disagree. A lot of MB&F aside, and maybe Urwerk, a lot of the high-end independents to me seem to be about dial decoration rather than design. And I find my tastes are moving towards simpler dial designs rather than, I can, what's the word? I admire all the work that goes into hand turning a dial, but I don't necessarily like the result. The craftsmanship is exquisite. To me, the result isn't. But I've used brands primarily as an indicator of, do I like the design language? I'm still a fan of Christopher Ward. I haven't bought one of their Bel Canto aside, one of their newer designs in 2 or 3 years. I don't like them. I'm still a fan of the brand, but I don't like the designs, and therefore I'm not buying the watches. Bel Canto aside, that was a special case.
You, Todd.
Right. I mean, yeah, this is interesting. I kind of agree with Dave a little bit. There's what right answer? There's not one. We're talking about luxury.
There isn't one, of course.
There isn't one. We're talking about luxury products, and we can argue till the cows come home. And you can go get some of the vitriol if you want to, like go to Rolex forums or something, and say Rolex stinks, go Omega, or something like that, and you'll just get it's like bashing the hornet's nest, and okay, yeah, you'll get everything stirred up and
poke the bear.
Nothing will occur. I can do those sorts of things too, I guess, if I wanted to, but that's not my thing. Although I could always poke a Seiko in somewhere, and somebody will, yeah. I mean, I know what you mean. I want an RGM at some point. Why? Because their dial work is extraordinary, and it doesn't cost 20 grand. Well, unless you buy one of their really crazy ones. But I can get a used RGM with a hand turn dial for a reasonable sum of money. Let's call it whatever that is. But what excites me about technology? Well, when this came out, which is my little clock with the tuning fork Accutron movement in it.
Oh,
which
nice.
Actually needs a small service, which is why it's not running at the moment. Gosh, what an amazing bit of technology that took years and years to produce, like Spring Drive, right? The Hamilton electric watch, first mass-produced electric watch. This one, which is the tuning fork watch from Accutron, and been copied and licensed to a bunch of watch manufacturers forever. And then, that technology is just, to me, just extraordinary. I won't buy many of those because they're a little impractical, but I have 3. But, what is, I don't know, what is,
Dave.
Yeah, what is the piece that makes me say, like the Bel Canto, that is awesome. I bought one of those, right? The 50, we talked about it earlier, the 50 Phantoms watch from Spinnaker. That's crazy interesting. I like that. It'll be my only quote unquote micro brand when it comes in. But what, I was looking at new watches when I was on the cruise. I was talking to Dean Bump, who's my guy for Little Switzerland in St. Thomas. And I was looking at them like, these are all really great, but none of them like jump out to me, And so what did I do recently? Well, there was a Movado, vintage 1969, 1970 Movado that came on that I was able to grab on its original Zenith bracelet with a triple date moon phase El Primero movement. Oh, that is cool. So anyhow, that's kind of where I am with it at the moment.
Yeah, you're kind of all over the board a little bit because anybody who knows you knows that you are a tech guy. You like the techie stuff. But the 50 Phantoms is way outside the norm for you. That is just
Yeah,
a
it is.
fun piece. That's like your
It's just
Swatch.
a fun piece. And it was very inexpensive, very reasonably priced,
Yeah.
very fun piece. And yeah, you're right. Yeah, I like movements. I like all that technology, even if it's old, innovative technology. That to me is super cool.
And that might be why I still want a super racing. I doubt I'll ever get one at the rate they're being made, but that was a very good piece of horology by a major brand.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Dave's saying maybe not. I don't know.
But I still want one.
Nice idea for sure. And it's a how to describe it. The thing is, they've done an amazing job with that, of pitching it as being something that is amazingly good for the consumer. What it's actually very good for is the watchmaker.
Yeah. Because they'll still charge they'll still charge you $750 to service it, even though it's
correct, and you can't do it.
Yeah,
it's a bit like Mercedes-Benz making the oil filter slightly easier to change for the mechanic, but still you have to remove the engine to actually do it. It makes it better for the mechanic, but it's like them telling you need to pay another $5,000 for this new BMW because look at where we've put the oil filter. So they've done a good job of it, and it's pretty cool. But yeah.
On a side note,
the true answer is that. Sorry, Mark. That would have been perfect if they had made it easily and infallibly user adjustable, so that the user could adjust the timing or regulation of their watch without having to send it back to be done by a watchmaker. Then it would have become super innovative for the consumer.
Super innovative for the consumer is generally not good for business.
Anti-profit.
It's anti-profit. Yeah, so not good for the business.
There's another good question actually from Boracic Time here. So current market is full of remakes and reissues, which is true. What is the 2020s watch design language? What is it?
Well, I was actually thinking about this, and I was thinking in 50 years' time, people are going to look back at the watches that are made now and go, did anybody design a watch in the 2020s? Because all they're doing is copying watches from the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Same is true of popular music. There's not who's going to say what was the best album of 2010? Well, no one will care. They're still going to say, go Queen, Chicago. They're going to go to 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe 90s somewhat, right? Yeah.
I think a part of that might be the Apple Watch phenomenon, really. Like the thing is the Apple Watch came and it does amazing stuff. I wear one. It is incredible. But at the same time, there's a romance to those older designs. And I wonder if that's not why it's so appealing today, currently, because
GPS watch, right?
But you see, you could argue. So, if you look at let's look at the 70s. Let's look at the Magenta era of sports watches, integrated bracelet sports watches. You could argue that was still, relatively speaking, in the heyday of watches being worn by most people as a day-to-day thing, and it began to move into there was more of a market for premium watches, began to become more of a thing in the 70s, 80s. Yeah. But those designs didn't exist prior to that. What was a watch prior to that? It was round, it was 32 to 34 millimeters, and it had bits that stuck out that allowed you to put a strap on it. Sure, there was some beautiful watches before that. Usually they fell into the high jewelry camp. You wouldn't argue that there was particularly design-led watches in the masses at that point. And suddenly in the 70s, there was these weird and wonderful shapes that started to come along, whether it was octagons, hexagons, yada, 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 driver-style watches, all of these kind of things. They didn't exist then, but people were like, oh, these are cool, look at this. Some of them, to be fair, took much longer to get going than history would have you believe. History would have you believe they launched them and the world like fell at their feet in worship of them.
It's certainly not true.
Most of them actually, yeah, exactly. It's revisionist history. Most of it was like folk going, "What is this?" And it took them 5-10 years to actually get on board with it. But you're right. There probably hasn't been any. Grand Seiko, maybe Grand Seiko have done some interestingly weird things with case shapes, like the Godzilla that they did a couple of years ago. That faceted titanium case is a wee bit different, but again, you've maybe seen some stuff like that from Hublot maybe and things like that in the past. It's not identical, but not that different. But again, it tends to be the small independents that are really pushing that. You look at, we say MB&F, but they probably are the market leader. At MB&F and our work, they're really pushing the boundaries of case shape, design, aesthetic, and look compared to what anyone else.
But they're an Aston Martin. They're also an Aston Martin.
Yeah, there's a I was going to say there's a micro brand, and in a relatively really affordable brand, Zarek Watches does some really fun, innovative stuff at a very low price point. So if you're looking for something funky and cool, I do like what they've done. They're just they're big, and that's probably as a matter of necessity for what they're doing so wild, and they don't really have the resources for miniaturizing.
Atowak as well.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But I think what it shows you is, by and large, the majority of people are pretty conservative when it comes to aesthetic and taste. That's just a fact, Why is there more, I don't know, white, black, and grey cars sold in any other colour? And that's just the fact of it. People don't like outlandish generally. They like to think they like the idea of it, but they don't actually do it. It's the same for watches at the end of the day. And, MB&F and our work can do it because they make a couple of hundred watches each a year, and there's a couple of hundred crazy lunatics that like the idea of it and have the money for it, and they'll buy it. But when you're an Omega, Rolex, IWC, you have to cater to the mass market, and that's just the way it is. But I think the 70s, there's a lot of probably our age who were born in the 60s, 70s and have a little bit of a rose-tinted spectacle view of, that was things were a bit more fashionable, a bit more cool back then. We can kind of reinvent that and roll it back out. But was it better? In the UK, certainly, it was full of industrial action, bin lorry strikes, coal miner strikes,
flared trousers.
That was flared trousers. The 70s was the 70s. I like the idea of the 70s. I don't ever want. Yeah. I don't actually want to go back there. Thanks very much.
No. But the romance, you said that's the key thing. The romance.
The romance. It's the romance and the rose-tinted glasses.
Yeah, people want
modern marketing.
Yeah, they want a 57
marketing,
Chevy, right? A 57 Chevy. Have you ever driven one? Oh my gosh, they're awful.
Yeah, I hark back to days of being a teenager in a hot hatch, and I think I was literally driving about in a 700 kilogram box of death. And it was literally like if you lifted the throttle off going in a corner at more than about 50 mile an hour, the thing tried to eat you into the trees, and if you're involved in an accident, God forbid, you actually managed to get out of the thing in one piece. And
no one ever walked alive out of a Peugeot 205 GTI accident.
Exactly.
It's just not going to happen.
Do I still think I really want one again? Yes.
Yes.
If I got in one now, would I think, can I please just have my air suspension and my automatic gearbox back, please?
Yes, exactly.
Right. I don't want to drive it far, but I want that car again in some way, right? A 67 Camaros. I used to hot rod those. I mean, do I want one again? Sure, I do. I'd love to have one. Where would I
you want it as your daily driver?
I drive it to the grocery store or to car meets, and I'm not taking it on a road trip. No way am I doing that.
It's like 70s fashion. Does anyone really want to wear Draylon again? No. Just
no.
Right.
Sansa belt slacks. Let's get them back.
That's right. Do I want 3 of these? Yes, I do. Absolutely, I want 3 of these. And
I think to roll back and answer the question of why is there so many vintage remakes, because actually what people want by and large is the same reason as why Renault have brought back the Renault 5 as an electric car, or Alpine brought back the original Alpine, or the Ford Mustang, and the GT40 that Ford did a few years ago. People like the idea of that aesthetic and look, but don't want the grief and hassle that goes with old stuff, because there is generally hassle, especially vintage watches. They can be a nightmare, an expensive nightmare. And if you can get something that fundamentally looks like it, feels like it, it's reasonably, cost effective to get it, and you get a 7-year warranty with it, then it probably ticks enough boxes to not do the old thing.
No, and that's the thing. Like that, I was doing vintage watches not that long ago, and I just got to where I like a watch that I can just beat up, I can get wet, I cannot worry about it on a day-to-day basis. If I get caught in the rain or whatever. So get back to that like solid modern watch makes me feel good. No, well, sure. Yep, I have my Apple Watch as well.
Yeah, and I have it set up too to look like what? A chronograph.
Exactly. Yeah. Well,
But
I think that's going to wrap it up.
Do I care about?
You guys have any final thoughts?
Yeah, we answered absolutely nothing that we were planning to answer.
Absolutely
nothing. How it should move on.
Like I said early on when we had this topic, I'm like, this is way out there. We're going to talk about it,
and it's not an economics lecture. It's not an economics lecture. If this was dull, imagine how dull the economics lecture would be, or the Harvard Business Case review would be.
So remember, tune in next week for the economics lecture.
And there will be a quiz before we start.
I think Sam's in charge next week, so hopefully this won't happen.
So thanks.
If there was a reason to welcome Sam back, this was it.
This was it. Hey, he came up with the topic. Let's be clear. I did not come up with this topic. We can blame Sam.
We talked about it on WhatsApp, right? We kind of all
I think it's a fair enough topic, but it got some folk going, so we'll see.
Yep.
Yeah.
So thank you all for the interaction in the comments. It's been fascinating.
We will see you again
and
soon.
Michael,
thanks for watching.
Michael A, you're right. Corduroy pants are cool.
I do love corduroy.
Until your thighs set themselves on fire.
I've got a great corduroy sport coat. I love it. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Take care, guys.
Thank you all.